Hello friends, this is Corey. Welcome to another watercolor tutorial. I have been doing features of the face on several of these. I did eyes and lips, so now it just makes sense to do a nose. So this is a tutorial about painting a nose with watercolor. I started out with some skin tones already pre-mixed from my last painting, and I just modified the one a little bit. The base was made up of yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna, cadmium red light, as well as a little bit of cadmium red medium, and then a little bit of ultramarine blue. And I altered it because it was kind of a little too yellow, so I added more ultramarine blue to tone it down, and then some of that cadmium red medium because the skin tone on the reference image was a very kind of warm color, and I will link that reference image in the description below. So on this one, I did not do a underpainting. I just started out. If you've seen any of my other videos, I have done some underpaintings before, but I don't do an underpainting on every single piece. So this is one of the ones where I did not, and I just started with that beginning skin tone and just laying in the lightest layers, letting it dry, going back and adding in some of those darker tones and just building up the detail. I almost think of it like sculpting, where you kind of building up layers. And with watercolor, it is pretty paramount to maintain your highlights and whitest whites. If you cover them, there are ways to try and get it back to the light, either with painting over with like a gouache color, or if you can find a decent white watercolor, that can work as well. And then there's white pens or white colored pencils. But if you can from the start already maintain those light white highlights, it's just going to be better in the long run, so you don't have to try and work to get it back. So I definitely painted around those white areas, making sure to maintain them. And you can start off, I start off a little conservatively, where I make sure I have plenty of that area blocked out. So then the more you paint, you'll find that some of that watercolor starts seeping into that white area. And so that's okay if from the start your highlight is a little too big, because the more you paint and the more layers you add, the paint will start kind of encroaching on that white area in a bit of a natural way as you soften the edges. For a lot of the shadows on the nose in this piece, I used burnt sienna as well as some Payne's gray for the really, really dark areas. And the nice thing about using those in tandem is that the burnt sienna is quite a warm color. You can see on that right side of the nose that I'm building up that shadow first off with the burnt sienna. But then when you go back in some of those darkest areas with the Payne's gray is more of a cool color because it's kind of in that blue-gray spectrum. So something that can be really nice and add a bit of dynamic to your painting is contrast between warm colors and dark colors. So if you have kind of transitioning those more warm neutral areas or just regular skin tones, and then some of your darkest shadows being more of a cool color, it just helps add a bit of depth versus if you have all warm colors. Again, it's just another way to add some contrast, and contrast always helps make a piece pop a little bit. There you see I am starting on that underside, that undertip of the nose, and on that right side of the nose to add a bit of the Payne's gray, and just working in almost glazes, a little bit like oil painting with watercolor. You do have to wait until your bottom layer's dry and then go back with those thin layers on top and keep building it up. Something that can be really helpful when you're painting somewhat complex shapes, I mean, the features of the face are not generally easy, is just trying to think of them in terms of what basic shapes can you break them down into. So for instance, the nose overall, the bridge of the nose, is kind of like a cylinder. So just remembering, okay, I'm going to have the highlight at one point, and as it curves away from me, there's going to be kind of those neutral tones and then into a dark shadow, and then after the dark shadow it lightens up a little bit, and then the other side where the light is shining won't go as dark as the other because it won't need that shadow. And then the sort of bulb of the nose and the two sides around the nostrils are kind of more spherical type shapes. So you have that highlight kind of at the midpoint where the light is hitting, and then as it curves away from you, it gets a little darker. And then you have that bottom shadow, but then there's a little bit of cast light underneath. So you're not gonna necessarily have a really, really dark edge right at the bottom of the nose. You are gonna have a little bit of a low light. There you see I just added a bit of some warm. I am to get some of the warm tone back, adding just very light bits of some of that cadmium red here and there, and it just helps make that tone really nice and warm for the skin. I do, for the darkest part of the nostrils, in addition to Payne's gray, add pure black to it just to make it as dark as it can possibly go. It's good to have that full spectrum of darkest darks and lightest lights. Again, that's another way to increase contrast and make your piece just have more dimensionality. I do want to talk a bit about materials here. So if you've seen any of my other videos, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm using my size 4 Princeton and Art Brush Company round tip brush. It's my favorite. It works so well just for many things. So if I don't need to use another brush, it doesn't make sense to. So I use that. And then this is 140-pound watercolor paper. It was originally 6" by 9" and I cut it down to 6" by 8" because the top got a little ruffled. It's from like a watercolor notepad, and these first few pages, pulling them out, they have not come off cleanly, so I've had to just trim the edge off, which is fine, especially for these smaller paintings. And 140-pound, you wouldn't want to go really any less than that, even with this paper. The more layers I was adding, even though I was waiting between drying, it was kind of getting a little ruffledy. So if you can get 140-pound paper or more, that is great. And I'm almost at the end here, just adding those final touches, making sure all those darks are in there. If you want, you can slap a signature on there. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.